What's happening everyone, my name is Alex and welcome back. In today's video we are checking out the latest action camera from VanTop called the Moment 6S. So this is an action camera that you can buy for just under $200 and this is an action camera that can record in real 4K at 60 frames per second. And this is actually a recording that I've done with it in 4K at 60 frames per second a few days ago. And as you can probably see for yourself, the image is super clear and super sharp. Now, this camera also supports external microphones, and there is actually an external microphone that comes in the box with it. And I'm talking about this because I see this question in a lot of my reviews. Does this camera support an external microphone? So the answer is yes. And since we are talking about microphones, I might as well show you a sample done with the internal microphone and a sample done with the external microphone. So let's check those out. Alright, this is our first audio test with this new action camera that I'm trying out. So I'm currently walking and recording in 4K at 30 frames per second. It is a bit windy and you're probably gonna hear some traffic to my left. But under these conditions, this is how an audio recording from this action camera sounds like. This is a super quick audio test with an external microphone on the VanTop Moment 6S. So I'm currently recording in 4K at 30 frames per second, and as you can probably see, I am indoors, so there shouldn't be any other noise aside from my voice. So under these conditions, this is how audio recording from this action camera sounds like if you're using the external microphone. Another important feature for this action camera is the electronic image stabilization, and you can use the electronic image stabilization for recordings done in 4K at 30 frames per second, 1080p at 60 frames per second, and much more. And next I want to show some samples with the electronic image stabilization turned on and with the image stabilization turned off, and also a running sample. So let's check those out and I'll be right back. Alright, and we are moving on to our next test, and for our next test we have a quick running test. So I'm currently recording in 4K at 30 frames per second, and of course I have the electronic image stabilization turned on. So let's go running for a bit and see how this does. Alright, and we are moving on to a super quick unboxing. So the camera comes in a super cool looking box. The first thing we basically see is the camera in the waterproof case. And the waterproof case is good to up to 30 meters in the water. However, I haven't been diving with it, but I did have the waterproof case in water and there was no water going inside. Aside from that, you're gonna find a remote control in the box. So with this remote control, you can basically start and stop recordings, you can take pictures, you can turn off the camera and much more. Now you do have to pair the remote control with the camera the first time you get it. There is also a second battery, so the camera comes with two 1200 mAh batteries in the box, and on one charge you can typically get somewhere between 40 to 55 minutes if you're recording in 4K at 30 frames per second, or about an hour and a half if you're recording in 1080p. But of course that really depends on how you use the camera, if you keep the screen on and much more. There is also a user manual that has a lot of information in it, and it could come in handy if this is your first action camera. And aside from that, you're gonna find a bunch of mounts and stickers. So you can basically mount this camera anywhere from like a bicycle, a helmet, and so on. So definitely a lot of stuff that comes in the box. And we are moving on to the camera itself. So the camera is mostly made out of plastic, well, except for the lens. The lens is made out of glass, but the camera looks like most action cameras these days. On the front we have a small display, and on that display you can see the recording resolution, you can see the battery life, you can see if you're connected to Wi-Fi and much more. We also have a couple of LEDs on the front, on the side and at the top, but those LEDs can be turned on or off. At the top we have the recording button and the holes for the speaker. On the right hand side we have the power button, and that also lights up as I mentioned earlier. And on the other side we have the holes for the microphone and a little plastic flap that will cover the USB-C charging port. So this camera can be used while it's charging, and that's important mostly if you're doing time lapses, because those take quite a while to do. And talking about time lapses, this camera can do time lapses at the press of a button, and this is an example of a time lapse that I've done a few days ago. Now moving to the bottom of the camera, there we have a 1/4-inch screw holes, so you can attach the camera on a tripod or something like that. And we also have a little plastic door that allows you to remove the 1200 mAh battery and access the SD card. I've tried a couple of 64 gig SD cards with this camera and they both work fine, and there will be some links in the video's description just in case you don't know what SD card to get for this camera, but you basically need a class 10 SD card. And lastly, on the back of the camera we have a 2.33 inches IPS screen that's also a touch screen. Now don't imagine that the touch sensitivity is gonna be as good as you'd get on a smartphone, but it is good enough for an action camera. The viewing angles are really good, so you can see the screen no matter how you look at it, and you can also adjust the brightness, and that's definitely important. Next, we are moving on to one of the most important things for any action camera, and that is the video quality. And I have to say that the video quality from this camera is just as good as the video quality from one of my favorite action cameras out there, the E4K+. And that probably has to do with the fact that they use the same processor. So let's check out some video recordings that I've done with it, and I'll be right back. And we're gonna see some daytime video recordings first. And we're moving on to another 4K at 30 frames per second recording, but this time around I have the electronic image stabilization turned on, and I'm holding the camera in my hands, so a bit shaky maybe. I have to check this footage on the computer, of course. So this is how a recording would look like in 4K at 30 frames per second if you are walking and talking behind the camera. And we're moving on to another recording in 4K at 30 frames per second, but for this recording I'm using the gimbal, so the image stabilization is turned off, because I usually notice that with a lot of cameras, whenever you're using the image stabilization, the video quality decreases a bit. So I wanted to show you how how video recording basically would look with the image stabilization on and with the image stabilization off. And as you've seen for yourself, the daytime recordings look great and super sharp and super detailed, then on par with some other more expensive cameras like the E4K+. Now moving on to some nighttime recordings. Well, the nighttime recordings obviously don't look as good as the daytime recordings, but I have to say that the nighttime recordings actually look better than the recordings that you'd get with the GoPro 8, which is quite impressive considering that this is less than half the price. So let's check out those nighttime recordings. Alright, and we are moving on to another video test, but this time, as you can probably see, in low light, because obviously it is nighttime. So I'm currently recording in 4K at 30 frames per second, and of course I have the electronic image stabilization turned on as well, and walking. You may hear some traffic to my left and to my right, and maybe a bit of wind. So this is how recording at night would look from this action camera. Since this is a camera, of course it can also take pictures, and the same kind of applies to pictures. If you have plenty of light, the pictures are gonna come out very sharp and very detailed, but as soon as you don't have enough light, the pictures become kind of grainy. And of course all the pictures that you've just seen were taken with this camera. Another feature that I want to mention is the ability to connect, to work with this camera over Wi-Fi basically. So the camera makes a Wi-Fi network, you connect to that Wi-Fi network with your smartphone, and there is an app for Android and an app for iOS. And basically you can control the camera from your smartphone. You can see all the previous recordings that you've done in the past, the pictures, you can download them to your phone, and you can also start and stop recordings and of course change settings on the camera right from your smartphone. Using the camera is pretty simple since we have a touch screen. So from the home screen you can basically select what mode you need. So if you are recording something, if you take pictures, if you want to put the camera in a car mode, etc. Each mode has its own settings menu, and of course it will be a bit different depending on the mode that you're in, but if you are in the video recording mode, for example, you can turn on or off the image stabilization, you can turn up or down the volume, you can select the sharpness, you can turn on or off the distortion correction, and much more. So it really depends what mode you're in. And of course, the camera has a general settings menu, and in the general settings menu you can basically change the language, you can turn on or off the Wi-Fi, you can even change the Wi-Fi's frequency, so it can be 2.4 GHz or 5 GHz depending on the phone that you are using. You can turn on or off the front display, you can turn on or off the lights, and much more. So very simple and easy to use the camera, you just point with your finger on the screen basically. So to quickly conclude this video, if you're looking for an action camera that's not crazy expensive, but the camera that has really good video quality, the Moment 6S is definitely one that you should consider, because as you've seen for yourself, the video quality is extremely good from this action camera, not to mention that this camera supports an external microphone, and that could come in handy in a bunch of situations. Alright guys, hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did like it, don't forget to press that like button, don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching!